Alright, welcome to Media Hub. I'm John. This is my co-host, Will.
Hello.
Alright, what Media Talk is a podcast about everything and anything media. Meaning video games, movies, comic books, anime, web series, music, whatever. Anything that's entertaining, we love, and we'll talk about. So, alright, so let's get started. Today, our first episode, we are going to talk about the movie Tetsuo the Bullet Man. And it is directed by, Will, you can pronounce his name better than I can.
It's directed by Shinya Tsukamoto.
Shinya Tsukamoto. And if you haven't seen, Shinya Tsukamoto is known for directing some pretty bizarre movies in Japan. One is actually a really good one that I would recommend called Bullet Ballet. It is, to me, visually one of the best dramas I have ever seen, especially at the end. I'm not going to give away the end, but the final scene had me choked up. So, now, back to the film we're going to be talking about is Tetsuo the Bullet Man. Now, it is the third film in the Tetsuo trilogy, and to kind of give you an idea of what it's about, it's kind of like, think The Incredible Hulk, but it feels more of a mechanical beast, and it's much more of a twisted thing. So, from the Wikipedia outline, it pretty much says that it's about an American father who, is living in Japan. Like, his father is Japanese. One day his son gets, ran over. And shortly afterwards, he begins to transform into, this metal beast. And, it's kind of like, it's like a slow transformation. So like a Bruce Banner slowly transformed into the Hulk. Am I missing anything, Will?
Well, the key thing with the Tetsuo transformations is the idea of a rage. What happens is that in the movie Tetsuo the Bullet Man, you have the guy, the American, who's living and working in Japan. He's out with his son, and they've just been to see his father. And his father is obsessed with checking his family for signs of cancer and for giving them blood tests, because his wife, who was Japanese, she apparently died of some kind of mysterious illness, so he's obsessed with watching over his son and grandson's illness. And anyways, the guy and his son are walking along, and they're heading towards this tunnel, and this sort of car is coming at them, driving kind of dangerously, and he ends up running over the little boy. But what happens is really strange, is that the boy, he seemingly becomes some kind of metal monster himself, and there's all this blood that looks like steaming liquid metal or something like that. So it's this really horrific, nightmarish sight that triggers the beginning of this Tetsuo transformation in the father. So in all three of the Tetsuo movies, there's something that triggers the transformation in the Iron Man. In the first movie, it's a weird kind of psychic sexual thing. In the second movie, there's a conspiracy to try and get this guy to transform so he can remember his secret past. And in the third movie, there is a sort of scheme to get this guy to transform into Tetsuo that is a little bit different from the previous two, and it plays out in an unusual way.
Now, Shinya Tsukamoto mostly acts in almost all of his movies, I believe. And I know he was the villain in this movie. I haven't seen the first two, because I kind of saw this one by accident. I had just moved here to Texas, and it was on Netflix. And I was like, "Oh wow!" I couldn't find the other two. I'm pretty sure they're on right now, but this is on the instant streaming, so I instantly streamed it. I was expecting it to be in Japanese, and because it shocked me when it was all in English. And from what I read, this is actually the only film in the trilogy that's English, and I believe that Tsukamoto was probably doing that to possibly show Western audiences that he can do Western films.
Hmm.
But what I found most interesting about this film was the fact that, like, while it is in English, I believe that the way it was translated was kind of like a literal translation. And
Hmm.
because some of the English didn't come off as natural as the way we're
Hmm.
speaking, or the way, like, British people or Australians or whatever speak, you know? It came off kind of, not harsh, that's not the right word. It came off kind of rough in some areas.
Well,
Um,
I think what it was that the actors who spoke Japanese, they had to learn the lines phonetically. So they had to learn each of their lines in English syllable by syllable. They didn't necessarily know English in a fluent way. So I think that's part of the reason why it sounds a little bit unusual, because it does sort of put the actors who are Japanese speakers at a bit of a disadvantage to try to speak these lines in English, even though they may not be actually be fluent speakers.
right, right. Though I will give them this, though, even if they are not fluent speakers, they did a fantastic job with it. Like, there was so many things I praised about it, like the lighting, the cinematography. I really admired for the fact that you can tell that it wasn't a very big budget film.
Mm-hmm.
That, you know, it probably cost maybe $1 million, maybe under $1 million.
Mm-hmm.
But for the budget that uh, he had, the director had, was just amazing that he pulled off what he did. While
Mm-hmm.
I'm not gonna lie, I wasn't very impressed with the creature's look at the end.
Mm-hmm.
But but I also kind of had to remind myself, okay, this thing probably had a much significantly lower budget than most American films.
Mm-hmm.
So he working with Tsukamoto, what he had to work with, I completely applaud the man.
Yeah,
Um,
I mean, I think that what he did was that he took a lot of practical effects and used a lot of editing and sound design to sort of get across what you can't necessarily afford if you're working on a reduced budget. And I think that's what the secret of the movie was, is that it was very meticulously put together, even though it was a low budget film, and it managed to take advantage of the fact that you can achieve things with editing and practical effects that are pretty effective and impactful, and not necessarily have to spend $100 million.
right, right. It just shows that no matter what your budget is, your vision does not have to be compromised. And the
Mm-hmm.
fact of the matter is that you can still make an entertaining, awesome movie. Uh, one
Mm-hmm.
of one of my favorite, absolutely, possibly my favorite aspect of this movie was the score, the music
Mm-hmm.
score in the movie, the whole industrial rock music. I just absolutely loved it. It was just like one of those. I can't. I don't know if I'm copying it. This is not a quote of the music, so I'm doing it horribly. But it went like don 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 don.
Yeah,
But it
that's
was,
close.
yeah,
That's close.
close. But for some reason, like the second I started hearing that, like, and then seeing like the crazy visuals, I'm just like, dude, I don't know if I just want to like like sit back and be scared, or if I just want to start headbanging. I know it's a weird combination of uh, feelings, but it was like I found it disturbing and awesome at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you felt the same way, Will.
Well, I think what I like about the soundtrack, I agree. I think it's excellent. Is that it gives you that sense of power. It gives you the sense of impending destruction as the beast is unleashed, and that is something that I think that is effective about all of the Tetsuo movies. In that the music, it signals the coming of Tetsuo. It signals the unleashing of this power within. And I agree. I think it's quite exciting to hear the music and to see the beast unleashed and going berserk and all that. I agree. I think it's an excellent score. But I also think that the other thing that's interesting about the score is also how sounds are used in the movie. Everything is a little bit more louder and keyed up than you would expect in real life. It's not quite naturalistic, but it helps to put you in the sort of disturbed frame of mind of the main character, because he's experienced this shocking loss of his son. He's got all this like demands at work, and then there's this strange person who's tormenting him and people trying to kill him. And so the music and the soundscaping helps put you into his agitated state of mind, and it sort of it provides a kind of a through line for his gradual transformation into the monster.
Now, do you feel like the movie was a metaphor for like uh, loss and sadness and just rage? Would you say like that person goes through when they lose a loved one?
Yeah, I think so. I think that it's clear because part of also what you see in the movie is how the loss of the son divides the mother and the father. You know, the guy transforming into the Tetsuo, he is divided from his wife because his wife is very angry and she's the one that wants to go out and find the person who ran down their son. But he resists that because, you know, he naturally thinks that's crazy. I mean, he works in an office. He's not Charles Bronson. So you see how not only does the loss impact both of them in a visceral, emotional way, it's heartbreaking, it also creates division between them and resentment between them. And I thought it was played out in an interesting way. The movie is sort of played way over the top, but I felt like it was pretty insightful about what catastrophic loss can do to a married couple, and also how in real life, like a lot of times, we have this horrible loss and we can't do anything about it because we live in real life and we can't transform into a monster, right? But in the movie, it finds a way of exploring that dynamic within the context of this fantasy world where this guy is coming into this great power. And I thought that it was played out in a pretty sophisticated way, yeah.
Right. And you know, the lead actor, I have to give it to him that he actually did make me really feel for him, make me feel for his family. The
Mm-hmm.
actress was a little bit harder for me to kind of get into, but I think it's because, again, going back to the language barrier, I think she had a harder time acting
Mm-hmm.
outside of her native language.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but you know, I can tell like through her mannerisms and facial expressions that she was really into the character. I just think that you know, had it been in Japanese, I think I would have felt it a lot more from the actress playing the mother. But the guy
Mm-hmm.
playing the Tetsuo, I really think that he did a good job. Though there were a couple times where it was monotone, but overall, I felt that he definitely you can relate to him. You can relate to his numbness, his feeling of loss, his feeling of just
Yes.
despair. I mean, I've been there.
Yes.
I've lost a couple of loved ones, and I've gone through those feelings, like
Mm-hmm.
most of us have. But he really, just really brought it there. You know, and I think that. Unfortunately, I don't know his name as an actor. I think.
It's his name is Eric Bosick.
Yeah, I see.
He's not really famous or anything, but if I remember on his IMDb, he actually works in Japan in the video game industry. He's done like motion capture. He did a voiceover for one of the Silent Hill games, and he's appeared on Japanese television series. So he's not somebody who is known in Hollywood, but he is like an American actor working in Japan. So if a Japanese production needs a you know a white guy to be in one of their movies, I think he's in the pool of talent that they cast.
Yeah, you know that's pretty awesome though. In some ways, I kind of prefer it that way for him because you know that way he can actually be in some really good films because I don't really think that he would work here in Hollywood. He's definitely best as an independent actor.
Well, I mean, if he went to Hollywood, I mean, he'd be one amongst 10 million people trying to make it. You know what I mean? Like you go to Japan and it's a much smaller competition area. Yeah, I would imagine. I mean, I don't know what the film industry in Japan is like, but I imagine that if you were somebody who's not Japanese, you probably are going to stand out a little bit more, depending on what they're casting. I mean, obviously, they still make mostly movies about Japanese people with Japanese people, just like Hollywood mostly makes movies using white people. But still, if there is a need for a particular actor to play like a foreign character, it seems like he's in a good position for that.
I mean, there have been some occasions where I've seen uh, Japanese movies, well, not just Japanese movies, but Asian cinema in general, where
Mm-hmm.
I've seen them use non-Asian actors in movies.
Mm-hmm.
I know we're getting off the subject, but we'll get back to Tetsuo in a second.
Mm-hmm.
Like in South Korea, Park Chan-wook, he's known for using characters outside of his native Korea who speak English. Like he's used African American actors. He's
Mm-hmm.
in the movie Thirst. He's used Australian actors in his movie Sympathy for Lady Vengeance, or Lady Vengeance
Mm-hmm.
as it is here in America. Right now, he's actually filming his very first American film. Right now the title is Stroker. It might change, but I eagerly await that. Now, going back to Tetsuo the Bullet Man, I really think that Shinya Tsukamoto is probably wanting to come over to America to possibly do some movies. I could be wrong.
Mm-hmm.
I've been wrong before. Uh, that's my thinking. That's why he did it in English, was to show American studios, hey, I want to come over here and do some projects with you guys. Now, it could just be that's just how he wanted to tell the story.
Mm-hmm.
That's why he did it in that format. Why do you think?
Well, I think from what I've seen, I've watched some YouTube interviews of him talking about the production. There was an interview I watched. I think it was Comic-Con or something like that. And there was one interview where he talks one-on-one with somebody. And I do get the impression that the reason why he shot in English was to broaden the market for it and to try to, because English, the language is spoken all over the world, and it's sort of a thing where lots of foreign filmmakers will eventually make movies in English, either to broaden the market appeal or, as you say, to try and get work in Hollywood. I mean, Park Chan-wook, John Woo. There have even been French New Wave directors that have come over and made, movies or tried to make a career. Wong Kar-wai from Hong Kong did My Blueberry Nights a few years ago. There's lots of examples of directors either coming to Hollywood to want to make movies or being recruited by Hollywood to bring something new to stale formula pictures. What's funny to me, though, is watching Tetsuo the Bullet Man, is that if the idea was to make a movie that's more accessible to a Western audience, because I've heard Tsukamoto say in other interviews where with Tetsuo the Bullet Man, he was trying to make more of a Western-style movie with more of a clearly explained plot. But what's funny to me is that Tetsuo the Bullet Man still ends up being a very strange movie. It still ends up being very bizarre. And I almost feel like, despite Tsukamoto's efforts to try to appeal to a more Western or American or whatever mainstream audience, he still can't help but be himself. It's a very odd movie. And I like that. I like the fact that no matter what, he can't go Hollywood. He can't be tamed.
That's why I kind of don't think he really should go all Hollywood. I mean, I'm open to the idea of him coming over and making some, bringing a style to American cinema. But, I really think that when people look at Tetsuo the Bullet Man, I truly believe that, even though I really hate genre terms, but I believe that this is what is truly called an art film. Now, I believe some people give that term to movies that I don't consider art films per se. Like, I watched a film about a couple months ago, and it was a romance movie called Like Crazy. And that, to me, was not an art film. Independent film, yes. But, okay, let me clarify something real quick. All cinema, to me, is art. From, Akira Kurosawa to Michael Bay, it's all art. I view everything art, even web series, even video games, movies. This is why we started this podcast. Everything is art. But when I think of art film, I think of bizarre. I think of, like really odd stuff. Not necessarily a typical narrative film. And I think that people are wrongly giving films that still have an appeal to a wide audience the title of art film. Like they'll say, okay, Black Swan is an art film. Like Crazy is an art film. Seven is an art film. Those are not art films. Tetsuo the Bullet Man, that to me is an art film because just the visuals, the colors, everything in it is just, to me, it should be a movie that's played in a museum and not on Netflix. Well, I do appreciate it being on Netflix because I wouldn't have been able to see it.
Yeah.
But I don't know. Maybe you might disagree.
Well, no, I hear what you're saying. I think that what Tsukamoto does as a filmmaker is that he is somebody who, no matter what he does, he has to follow his own vision. I mean, I've seen most of Tsukamoto's movies. There's a handful that I haven't seen, and he's just come out with a brand new one, which is playing in festivals that I hope I get to see eventually. But I think what his thing is that no matter what he does, he always brings a personal and idiosyncratic vision to whatever he's doing. That he really is an artist. He's not taking direction from producers. And even when he does make a movie for hire, because he's done a couple movies that were basically for hire studio pictures. Probably the most interesting that I recall is a movie called Gemini, which is this very intense horror movie that definitely has some thematic similarities to his other movies in that it revolves around sort of a normal person being transformed into something bizarre and horrific by a sort of evil double or doppelganger or something like that. But that movie was like basically a studio picture. Now, if you watch Gemini, it doesn't seem like a studio picture. It's this wild, colorful, strange, intense movie, just like many of Tsukamoto's movies. And I think Tetsuo the Bullet Man definitely has that sort of distinctive look. And I think that what defines Tsukamoto as an artist is that he's kind of restless. He's always experimenting. He's always trying different structures, different ways of editing a scene. And I think that's what makes him more like an artistic director than somebody who just is hired to do another sort of like formula comedy or action picture for millions and millions of dollars. Like Tsukamoto, basically, he can't afford to fall into a routine. He's always got to keep it fresh because otherwise he doesn't know if he's ever going to make a movie again.
Right. I completely agree with you. I think that in some ways he's probably one of the more original directors I have seen. And as a up-and-coming director myself, I definitely take some inspiration from this. I want to see more of his films because I'm just so... Every time, both of his movies, Tetsuo Bullet Man and Bullet the Valet, I was just so sucked in, I just could not concentrate on anything else. I'm just like, oh my god, this is just amazing. There's just like something about his films that just touch me in the right way. Okay, that sounded perverted. That that just really get me in the zone. It's kind of like the only way I can describe it is probably like the very first time I ever seen Reservoir Dogs, and it's just how whenever you watch a Quentin Tarantino movie, you can't really turn away from the screen. You're just kind of like, what the hell's going on? What the hell's going on? And I wouldn't be surprised if Quentin Tarantino took some influence from Shinya Tsukamoto. I remember you telling me a story once that Tarantino wanted to produce a movie from him, but it never happened for some reason.
Yeah, from what I've read, this is coming from a book by Tom Mace, who's a film critic, M-E-S, but it's pronounced Mace, who wrote a book called, I'm trying to remember what the title of the book is. It's Iron Man, the cinema of Shinya Tsukamoto. And basically, Tom Mace is a film critic who's followed the careers of a number of Asian directors, and Tsukamoto is one of them. And in it, he details how, I think it was after Tetsuo 2, Body Hammer had come out, Tarantino had expressed interest in producing a new Tetsuo movie, Tetsuo USA. Basically, Shinya Tsukamoto was going to come to America, and they were going to have the Tetsuo transformation happen to Tim Roth, who is memorably Mr. Orange in Reservoir Dogs. And but for whatever reason, it never worked out. It's kind of mysterious. Like, the great thing about Tom Mace's book is that he actually got to sit down with Tsukamoto and talk to him. And also Mace has his own interpretations of the movies, which are interesting and insightful. He's a good writer. But I thought what was most interesting about the book was him having FaceTime with Tsukamoto. And Tsukamoto doesn't really spell it out, but I get the impression that basically Tsukamoto is kind of very individualistic in his filmmaking, and that even though Tarantino was basically extending this sort of golden opportunity, Tsukamoto, for whatever reason, couldn't accept it, and that he wanted to do it on his own. Because from what I understand, Tsukamoto, for most of his movies, he does everything himself in terms of marketing and financing. Like, he basically is a director, producer, but he also, he directs the photography a lot of times, he edits, he art designs, art directs his sets, all of the animations and weird monsters and things that pop up, that's usually his handcrafted work. So I think at the time he might have felt that he was like, well, this is very generous of Quentin Tarantino to do this. That's not how I work. It's very interesting because he doesn't come right out and say that he said no, but he does say that he kind of wanted to do things his way. And so it's very interesting. And I feel like almost like with Tetsuo the Bullet Man, the reason why it was done in English was almost like Tsukamoto seeing if he could do it. It was almost like a kind of masochistic challenge.
I really think that is proof that he can do it. He
Mm-hmm.
clearly showed uh, the world that he can do it. Like he can do a movie in English. Now, in some ways, I'm kind of sad that he never made the Quentin Tarantino produced one with Tim Roth, because I
Mm-hmm.
think that it probably could have been something great. I think it probably could have been a '90s classic, or it could have been a big flop. Who knows?
Well, that's the thing is that I think that it's one of those like great what ifs of you know cult cinema. It's like what if Tsukamoto had said yes, would it have worked out? I just get the impression from reading Tom Mace's book and the interviews he did with him that Tsukamoto is basically very individualistic and he works at his own pace and he likes to do everything on his own terms, and he's obsessed with the city of Tokyo. Like most all of his movies have something to do with Tokyo. All the Tetsuo movies, for sure, are about Tokyo and about what it means to live in Tokyo. And also the movie Bullet Ballet, although it's a little bit different, it's also absorbed with the experience of living in Tokyo. What the hell does it mean to be in Tokyo? What's going on with this city? What does it mean as an artist? And I feel like maybe Tsukamoto just couldn't figure out what to do in reference to the United States. Maybe because he hasn't spent a lot of time here. Maybe because he just couldn't get his mind out of Tokyo. I don't know, but it is one of the great what ifs. What would that movie have been like? I think Tim Roth would have been an interesting transforming metal mutant for sure.
Yeah, I think so. Well, I think how I kind of look at Shinya Tsukamoto and how in his love for Tokyo, it's kind of like how I look at like Martin Scorsese or Spike Lee or you
hmm
know or I think Darren Aronofsky, though I think he's more mobile, about their love of New York City.
Right, right.
How like you look at a Martin Scorsese movie, you're not gonna see too many Martin Scorsese movies outside of New York City. Not saying he doesn't shoot outside, because there are many where he's done that, but most of his movies are in New York City. Most Spike Lee movies are in Brooklyn. There's something about like the
hmm
look that appeals to these guys, and I don't blame them because or Tsukamoto, because I've always found city structure to be beautiful, which is one of the
hmm
reasons why I moved to the Dallas area, because I just love cities and whatnot, and I can see why they want to shoot all the films there. I think that maybe Tsukamoto just has such a love of Tokyo that he just can't see himself being himself outside of Tokyo.
That might be it. I mean, I think that one thing that's common to New York and Tokyo, I've never been to Tokyo, but I've been to New York, and I mean, when you're there, and I'm maybe people who live there all their lives get jaded to it or something, but I know visiting New York, you feel like you've stepped into this other world, especially if you're used to being in the South, where everything is like, maybe 1, 2 stories tall. Like you go to New York and it's like it's literally like you stepped into Gotham City. Like you are in this sort of mythic, towering beast of a place. And I get the impression that Tokyo is like that, but it's even faster in some way. And I
Well,
feel like you said with Martin Scorsese and Spike Lee, they're both kind of inspired and obsessed with the places we come from. I feel like with all three of these directors, Tsukamoto, Scorsese, and Spike Lee, there's this interest in the city almost as a living thing in and of itself. I mean, with there's this one Spike Lee movie I remember called Summer of Sam, which deals with the Dave Berkowitz killing spree in the context of this whole community in that time and place, and it's almost like the city itself becomes a sort of interconnected organism. Like you have different parts. You have the guys walking around shooting people because he's crazy and psychopathic. You have the different community groups. You have the mafia and the gangsters, and you got the punk rock scene. And it's all sort of like grows out of this very fertile environment of the city culture. And Martin Scorsese, some of his movies that also have that richness of the city, like Taxi Driver, Mean Streets, After Hours. There's a sense in both in these guys' work that the city gives birth to something that nothing else gives birth to. And I feel like that's a little bit of a motif in Tsukamoto, that Tetsuo has to be born in Tokyo. He can't be born in like the countryside. Well, I mean, what would be in the countryside to piss somebody off enough to become a metal mutant? You know what I mean? Like, it has to be that craziness of the city, that density, that energy, that life. And I think that's something that Tsukamoto keys into. That is, it's not the same as like a Spike Lee or Martin Scorsese, because Spike Lee is personal and sociological. Martin Scorsese is idiosyncratic but also a little bit sociological. Tsukamoto is more of a fantasist. So his is a mixture of like a fantasy destroying Tokyo, the city that drives him crazy, but it's also a love affair. It's the city that inspires him.
Yeah. Well, with that said, if you haven't seen Tetsuo the Bullet Man, you can watch it on Netflix, or you can go watch it on Amazon or buy it from Amazon. Moving on to our next segment of the show.
But we should, I think, before we go, we should talk about the ending of Tetsuo the Bullet Man. We should have a little bit of a spoiler section.
Oh, yeah. You know, actually, we should have said this in the beginning. Spoilers, okay? In our show, we're going to give away a lot of plot lines. Obviously, you've seen that, so my apologies. Spoilers all the way. So, yeah, definitely. So if you don't want to know the ending, just stop this podcast right now, watch it, then finish the rest. So, again, spoilers. Go ahead.
Okay, in Tetsuo the Bullet Man, what happens, which I thought was very interesting, was that the whole story seems to come down to the villainous character played by Tsukamoto trying to provoke a radical, destructive response from the new Bullet Man, right? Like, he seems to want to torment him to the point where he's going to unleash this destructive gun blast that's like a nuclear bomb that'll obliterate Tokyo. So there's this bizarre scheme of Tsukamoto not just wanting to provoke mutation in the Bullet Man, but to turn him into literally a living weapon of mass destruction, because he seems to have this sort of death wish for the city, this hatred of the city. He wants to blow it away. And it's a really bizarre notion if you think about it, the idea that you want to turn someone into like a human nuclear device. It's so crazy, but I think it's a great idea. And in the very end, what happens is that there's a confrontation between the Bullet Man, who's become this kind of like weird kaiju, this kind of like sort of puppeteered monster that you almost would see in a Godzilla movie or something. And he has this like huge like cannon with like this burning, spinning fire in it. And Tsukamoto like basically has this fantasy of being blown away by the blast, and you see the city being completely obliterated by this wave of destruction. But then what happens is they realize that's just him fantasizing his death. What the Bullet Man does is he attacks Tsukamoto with these metal tentacles, and he seems to like eat him. He absorbs him into his body. And right before he's totally swallowed, the Tsukamoto character is like, "You don't want me inside you. You don't know what I'll do." But then he eats him alive. And then it cuts to 5 years later, where basically the Bullet Man has gotten his shit back together, and he's had a new son, and he's like the head of technology development at the corporation. And he seemingly has sort of absorbed the destructive chaos of the Tsukamoto character, and has come under and has controlled his own power, and he's going off to work. And there's this scene where he's like walking to work wearing his like sort of talking head, stiff man suit, and he's like walks past these guys who are just hanging out on the street, like they're like, want to be gangbangers or something like that. And then they see this like weird power like vibrating off them. They're scared off, and then he sort of walks off into the sunrise, basically. So it has this really crazy ending, because it turns out that the whole scheme was to turn him into a human nuclear weapon. But then the Bullet Man turns it all around and not only absorbs Tsukamoto, but becomes like this bizarre corporate time bomb waiting to go off. I don't know. It's a very bizarre ending, but I think it's really, really amusing.
It was an amusing ending. I mean, in a sense, it was a happy ending. Because he was able to move on from the death of his son. He had a new son, though. I don't really see it as like a replacement son. Just as him moving on. I mean, the bad guy was supposedly killed. Because, if there's another Tetsuo movie, Tsukamoto is probably going to be back in his villainous form.
Well, you probably noticed at the end when the guy is like about to go to work, he looks in the mirror and he hears Tsukamoto's voice again.
Yeah.
You don't know what I'll do. So the implication is that the Tsukamoto character has been absorbed into him somehow, and he might be like a Jekyll and Hyde or something like that. Like if there's another adventure with this particular Tetsuo, he might be like a dual-natured being or something like that. There's also this sense that he's still dangerous. Like at the end when he walks past the punks on the street, they're sort of like making fun of him, but then there's like this weird vibrating thing. It's like they sense the power like emanating from him and they back down. So it's like the real monster is the monster in the suit who goes to the corporation. It's not these guys in the corner. These guys can barely, probably sell a dime bag. You know what I mean? Like the real, monster is the one who puts on that tie and goes to work and, whatever, pillages the finances of the world. I don't know.
Well, you can find, like, back again, you can find Tetsuo all over the internet. Just one note, you don't need to watch the first two to know what's going on. Each one's an individual entity of its own. Well, this episode was completely about movies, so I think our next episode we'll talk a little bit about video games, maybe some movies. See, how this is going to work is we're going to talk about everything. Some episodes we're going to talk about one subject specifically, like maybe we're going to say on movies one time or video games one conversation. But some episodes we're going to mix it up, so we'll see. All right, I'm John.
I'm Will.
See you next time.